Welcome once again to the Influencers Podcast. We are here to see the influence of your life grow, that you have been equipped by your Father to be a victor. Hi, my friend. Scott Young here. Welcome to the Influencers Podcast. Dave Donaldson, our co-host, is out on assignment, but you've tuned in on a great day. Why? Because we all need mercy. I remember trying to teach our children about mercy. Sometimes they would do things they shouldn't have done, and we would explain to them, your actions have consequences, right? Yes. But we're not going to give you that consequence. We're going to give you mercy. Mercy is when you deserve something, but you get mercy instead. King David in the scriptures called out for mercy after he sinned against Bathsheba and Uriah. He needed mercy, was confronted by the prophet. And he prays in Psalm 51, have mercy on me, O God, according to your steadfast love, according to your abundant mercy. Blot out my transgressions. Wash me thoroughly from my iniquities and cleanse me from my sin. Today's guest knows about receiving mercy and giving mercy. Abby Johnson worked with Planned Parenthood for 8 years. She worked her way up to become a clinical director or a clinic director in Bryan, Texas. She actually became the Planned Parenthood Employee of the Year in 2008. But then she witnessed a 13-week abortion of a fetus, and she walked away. In 2012, she has founded And Then There Were None. She wrote a book that was turned into a movie. Unplanned was seen by people all across the nation. She's the author of a new book called Fierce Mercy. She lives with her husband, Doug, and 8 children. And I want to welcome you, Abby, to the Influencers Podcast. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on.
Just tell us a little bit about your story. Those are incredible facts that we just went over very quickly, but unpack them a little bit. How did you get into Planned Parenthood and how did you get out?
Yeah. So it all took place over an 8-year time period. So I went to college at Texas A&M, did not know anything about Planned Parenthood, honestly. I didn't know anything about the abortion industry. I grew up in a conservative Christian household, but it was different. I was born in 1980. I think that time period of the 80s and 90s, it was just different. There was nobody standing up at a podium and shouting their abortion. Gloria Steinem had not gone on the cover of Vanity Fair wearing a shirt that said, I've had an abortion. So, people were private about their sin. They were not public and proud about their sin during that time. Politics, was private. My parents would have died before they would have put a sign in their yard saying who they were voting for, right? And I think my parents were just like, we've taught Abby the biblical pathway to marriage, which is abstinence. And, she's a good kid. So she's not going to, waver from that. And so as long as she doesn't, then we don't need to talk about something, these uncomfortable sort of topics with her. And so we didn't talk about it. We never talked about it in church. So I went to college just really ignorant. I mean, just in the purest sense of the word. I was just very ignorant about any sort of social issues. And met a woman with Planned Parenthood. And I mean, by the way, that is the ideal target for an organization like Planned Parenthood. Someone who is ignorant, unknowing, young, inexperienced, because then they can take your mind and they can fill it with what they want, right? They can take your mind and they can fill it with their talking points. And, I didn't know what it was to be a feminist or what. I mean, it sounded like something my parents wouldn't like. So I was like, yeah, I want to be that. but yeah, I was just, living a very worldly life and was just doing, the college thing, and got involved in Planned Parenthood pretty innocently, and just started working there, started was getting paid a lot of money, which was nice to be so young and to be getting paid so much. And then graduated from college, got a raise, got a new title, got promoted, kept getting promoted, kept getting awards, kept getting all these accolades. I was white, I was young, I was educated, and that's kind of like a unicorn inside of Planned Parenthood, because they typically hire minorities, single mothers, women that come from hard situations, uneducated, undereducated. And so, they saw me and they said, we want this girl to rise up through the ranks quickly. And so that's what they did with me. I was, the youngest clinic director at Planned Parenthood. And I was only 27 when I took the job, and, running a multi-million-dollar facility. And I did well. I did a great job for them, and really believed I was doing the right thing. Really believed I was there to help women in the beginning, and didn't get involved because I thought, I want to kill babies or anything like that. That wasn't the intention at all. But over time, there was definitely a hardness that came over my heart. Over time, there was definitely callousness that took over, and definitely, believed that abortion for any reason was fine. And eventually I ended up leaving after witnessing a live ultrasound guided abortion procedure. I'd never seen anything like that before in my life. Ultrasounds are not typically used during an abortion procedure. So we use them ahead of time to tell how far along the woman was in her pregnancy, so that we would know how much to charge her for the abortion. But we didn't actually use them during the abortion. So I'd never seen anything like that before. We had a visiting doctor. He said, he wanted me to see what this looked like. He thought it would be a good learning opportunity for me. And I stood there just in shock as this 13-week-old baby fought for his life. He was flailing his arms and legs, trying to move away from the abortion instruments. And I thought, this is not choice. This is not justice. This is not healthcare. This is not any of the things that I had believed it to be, that I had said it to be. And I just thought, this is murder. That's what I had witnessed. And that was hard to reconcile, because by that time I'd had 2 abortions of my own. I knew I had facilitated and thousands of abortions. And so coming to terms with that realization that I had murdered 2 of my children, and I had participated in thousands and thousands of murders of other children, that was hard to kind of, carry that burden. But the Lord is good, and He is merciful, and He is kind to forgive us. And and so ever since then, I've been really just going around and trying to expose what's taking place in these abortion facilities, but even more than that, really trying to help bring healing to those who have been hurt, harmed, affected by abortion in some way.
When you were young and you said they filled your mind, you were like impressionable. What kind of things did they fill your mind with? What was the worldview they brought to you that just encouraged you to keep working with them?
So they said that, they were there to help women, particularly low-income women who, without them, would have nowhere else to go for health care. Back then, Planned Parenthood was that was when they were really, really focused on this preventative health care message. So that was, back when they were talking about, it's only, abortion's only 3% of what we do. And that was really, kind of a hardcore talking point for them back at that time. They don't really say that anymore. But back at that time, that was really kind of what they were putting out there. They were talking about how they wanted to prevent abortions through widespread access to contraception. It wasn't until later that I realized that, more than half the women we saw were actually using contraception at the time that they got pregnant. So it wasn't that birth control was a solution. It was actually self-control was the solution. Yeah. But self-control wasn't making us any money. Birth control was. And the failure of that birth control was really what was bringing us money. So that was one thing. I mean, definitely the idea of fear. So, that if legal abortion isn't accessible, then women are going to die from, back alley abortions. This was a message I'd never heard before. Mm-hmm. So, I didn't know which way was up or down. I was like, oh my gosh, that sounds terrible. Women dying everywhere from these back alley abortions. That's awful. This thought process that people are trying to remove women's rights, that women had worked so hard to gain rights for themselves, and now people were trying to strip us away from, rights to our bodies. Just kind of those things, but really this idea of like helping women. We just want to help women, and there was never a consideration for the child in the womb. I mean, you can't make any sort of consideration for the child in the womb, or else the whole scheme dissolves.
So how has your point of view changed? So that's what you were fed. You've had this traumatic experience of this witness of a child inside the womb being ripped out. And how have you, I'm sure you started studying, reading. What has been the change in your perspective from what you were taught to where you are now?
Well, I mean, certainly I've learned so much. There were a lot of things that, you kind of start to, I don't know, you make excuses for, you make justifications for while you're actually in the industry, when you're working there. All kinds of malpractice, negligence, that, you just kind of, somehow you excuse. Mm-hmm. Women almost bleeding to death on the table. You're not allowed to call an ambulance because that will look bad. There's always people outside praying. And so if an ambulance shows up, certainly they're going to take pictures of it and it'll end up on the internet. So, we would personally transport patients in our own personal cars if we ever had to take them, to the hospital or something. Things like that. I mean, paying people hush money to keep them quiet if they had a serious side effect, a serious malpractice event where they had to go to the hospital, where we left, part of their baby in their womb. And they had to go to the hospital to have it removed because they had become septic and had almost died because of our medical negligence. And, these women, they could have gotten hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars from Planned Parenthood. But these are poor women. Yeah. By and large, I mean, women who have abortions are overwhelmingly, the majority of them are poor. And the majority of them are minority. So, Planned Parenthood knows that. They know that they're very easily taken advantage of. So when that happens, you write them a check for $1,000 and you make them sign a non-disclosure agreement saying that, they won't ever go to the media and talk about the things that they've seen, the things that they experienced. And when I was the director, it was my job to hand in the check and to make them sign the NDA. When I became the director, I got to know people that were with the Warren Buffett Foundation. Warren Buffett is single-handedly the largest donor to Planned Parenthood or to the abortion industry in our country. He donates upwards of $130 million a year. He does that through a fund he calls the Justice Fund, ironically. And he gives money to low-income women, so hear me say minority women, so that they can abort their children. And he's an overpopulation guy. He's a population control advocate. So, but not any population, just poor people, right? And minority people primarily. So, you start seeing these things, but you just kind of somehow you're able to dismiss them and excuse them and just kind of let them go. But then when God opens your heart to one reality, he begins to, open your heart to all of these other things that were happening around you that you knew were wrong, but you didn't say anything. You didn't, you just kind of let it go. But there were a lot of things I started talking about, and I started, kind of making people aware of what was going on after I left, and things I can't even believe I participated in. I can't even believe I said and did some of the things that I did. But truly, when you're involved in such an evil environment, you are really blinded. Yeah. You really are. And I look back on some of that time, and it doesn't even feel like me. It doesn't even, like, I can, see myself standing in this lab. I can see myself, standing in my office, and I'm just like, is that really me? Was that really me in there saying these things, doing these things? And it was, but it was like, in some ways, there was just this evil oppression that kind of takes over your mind and your life.
I believe that sometimes I say that sin makes you stupid. Yeah. It certainly blinds your eyes to truth and reality. And then you had this moment of revelation, and you had been through trauma, been through abortions yourself, had witnessed abortions, had assisted in abortions. How has been your journey towards mercy, towards healing, towards redemption? Because for sure, Abby, someone's on our platform right now that's listening, and they've been traumatized. They've been through an abortion. They've been a participant. And talk about your healing in hopes of others finding healing.
Yeah, so it's a heavy burden to carry on your own, for sure. And honestly, I thought that it was something that I was going to have to carry on my own, because I thought, how could God ever forgive me of that? Right? It's so bad. It's so heavy. Like, how could I even give that to him? It's so bad. And, the Lord really opened my eyes to just the pride behind that. Like I'm so small compared to how great he is. And my sin looks so small compared to his mercy and his forgiveness and his grace. And so it feels heavy for me, but it feels light for him. Yeah. And And so I just really became convicted that my refusal to hand over my sin to him was really, it was sinful for me. That was a
That's
sin
so
of
good.
pride.
That's so good.
And I just thought, I can't do this. I want to be free, and I want to be free from sin. And I was still kind of living, I was kind of wallowing in this sin, you know? And, but if I'm honest, like I kind of had to practice. I had to practice giving it over to him. I had to practice living in his will day by day. So
what does that mean? Practice handing it over to him.
Yeah. So, I would wake up in the morning and I would always be reminded, right? Because Satan is always trying to remind you of
that's true.
what you've done, right?
Yep.
He's always trying to remind you that, you're not good enough. Look at what you've done. Look how terrible you are. God will never forgive you, right? It was like I would wake up in the morning and it was like every day I was reminded of my sin, you know? And it was easy for me to be like, oh, Satan, you're right. I am just a piece of garbage, But then I would be like, no, like God has said something different. God has told me otherwise. So I would give it to him. And I'd be like, Lord, I'm giving this to you today, and I'm going to live in this present day, this gift that you've given me today. And I'm going to use my past for you. I'm going to use my past to glorify you, whatever that means, right? Whether it's in my family, whether it's sharing my testimony, whether it's helping a homeless guy, whatever it is, like whatever gift you've set out for me today, however you want me to use that gift, I'm going to do it today. And eventually, and I'll be honest, some days I didn't. Some days I let Satan win. Some days, I just wallowed around in self-pity and drank too much wine and had a bad day,
But you didn't give up.
But I didn't give up. And the next day I started over, and eventually, after I continued to practice, after I kept at it, it just became a habit, and I didn't have to think about it anymore, and the thoughts from Satan, they were less and less. And he wasn't using my mind as his playground anymore. And it just became so easy to I just couldn't imagine not giving it to the Lord. I couldn't imagine not living in God's freedom. I couldn't imagine not living for him every day. I couldn't imagine not setting that at the foot of the cross and living outside of that bondage. And so eventually it just became really simple. And there's still some days that are hard. I'm not saying there's not. There's still some days I'm reminded, but when those hard days come, I rejoice in them, because I rejoice in the reminder of what God has done for me.
Now, you've written this book, Fierce Mercy. So how does the concept of mercy help you? And then talking to someone that's listening that needs to start practicing, like you, practicing receiving God's mercy. Talk about the concept of mercy and what you've written.
So people are like, how'd you come up with the title Fierce Mercy? I think a lot of people are, they're like, oh, I heard the still small voice of the Lord. And God, I have to say, God has never been subtle with me.
He knows his kids. That's why.
Yeah, that's right. And that's what I always say. Like, for years, I was trying so hard to fight with God. And that whole time, he was just fighting for me. Yeah. And that's how he is, right? He knows his children, and he continues to fight for us no matter where we are, right? And he continued to fight for me, even while I was in the depths of evil, even when I was, in the middle of this abortion facility. He was still fighting for me, and he won. He won me.
Mm-hmm.
And, he came fighting for me like a lion, right? Like he came roaring through that abortion clinic, right? Like a fierce lion, like a father who's coming to protect his child. And that's what it was for me. And, gosh, he is so fierce, but his mercy is so gentle. And
what is mercy to you? When you say that word, what does it mean to you?
Oh, it's complete and total surrender to God and accepting that surrender, and accepting his complete and total forgiveness. There's so much freedom in surrendering to the Lord and just submitting to him and just allowing him to just mold you in every way, to mold your mind, to mold your heart, to take over your soul. That's the most freedom I think I've ever felt, was just complete submission to him. And that is his mercy. When you are wrestling against him, when you are fighting against him, when you've completely walked away from him, and yet he still allows you to come back and just give yourself to him and completely surrender, even after you've been this disobedient child,
My real prayer is that people that are listening to the platform right now, that they would receive the mercy you're talking about, that they would know God's stubborn love, that he doesn't give up on you, that when you mess up, he comes to pick you up. And I really liked what you said, and I wrote it down, that hanging on to my sin was sinful to me. Someone needs to hear that. Hanging on to my sin is actually a sin, and releasing it, and because of God's mercy. And I love this verse in the scripture that says, his mercy is new every morning, which means if we blew it yesterday, if yesterday was a tough day, you talked about that, even now, okay, today's a new day, and it's a day for mercy. It's a day for grace. It's a day for forgiveness. And Abby, thank you for being part of the Influencers podcast. I want to just make sure, we'll put it in the show notes, but how do people learn more about you? How do they connect with you on the internet? How do they find you?
Sure. People can learn about me, my podcasts, my books, my movie, my ministries, all that at abbyj.com, abbyj.com.
abbyj.com. And thank you so much for being a part of the Influencers podcast. I want to thank everyone for listening. Of course, as we listen, just know that your brokenness doesn't have to hold you back. That God's mercy is more amazing. I love when Abby said that God is just bigger than we think he is. And he's coming for you like a roaring lion to redeem you, to heal you, and to give you his mercy. David found mercy. Abby found mercy. Scott has certainly found mercy, and you can find mercy too. And then give that mercy to others. You've been greatly forgiven. Be gracious to others. And that will influence and increase the influence of your life, which is what we're all about. Abby, thank you for joining us. And to all our friends who have been part of today's podcast, thanks for being a part. Keep shining brightly in a dark world. I'm Scott Young for the Influencers Podcast.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of the Influencers Podcast on the Charisma Podcast Network.
If you enjoy our content, we would love for you to subscribe and have the opportunity to tune in to future podcasts. You can follow us on all social media platforms at the Influencers Podcast Official. You can stay up to date, hear more inspiring content, and unlock your full potential as an influencer.
Remember to use your influence to create lasting change that draws the world closer to Jesus.